Welcome to the Holding Time podcast, where we share inspiring stories from remarkable mothers who participated in the Holding Time project in Bradford. Each episode, we explore their unique breastfeeding stories, the highs, the lows, the challenges and the triumphs. Whether you're expecting, a new parent, or simply curious, we invite you to hear from these resilient warrior women as they share their experiences. Find out more at holdingtime.org.
I am Maddie and I live between Leeds and Bradford with my husband Mike and our little boy Peter, coming up to 3 years and 4 months now.
Are you feeding still?
Yeah, often.
Yeah.
It varies massively on days that we're together and days that we're not. There are some days where I get up before he wakes up and I come home after he's gone to bed, and so we don't feed at all. And I night weaned coming up to a year ago now, so he doesn't feed overnight, but I do sometimes stick a boob in his mouth at kind of like 4 or 5 o'clock just to get him to sleep for a little bit longer. But then days when we're together, you know, if we're having a lazy day, which day was it? Thursday, he was all over the place with his emotions, so he fed quite a lot that day. So yeah, it's really variable. He still asks a lot. I'm starting to try and introduce some boundaries. I'm not ready to wean completely. I'm not. But yeah, I do sometimes introduce some boundaries if I just don't feel like I want to, because his hands are everywhere at the moment. That's the other thing that I'm experiencing. His hand is constantly down my top. And he goes, but my hands are cold. And it's because my chest is warm. I know that's where he wants it there. It's become really important to us. Breastfeeding has changed my life, is the one thing that I want to say, because it has led to a complete career change for me. I'm a medical doctor, I've been qualified for 10 years.
Wow.
And up until the end of July, I was an Obs and Gynae registrar working at Bradford.
Wow. What, the infirmary?
Yeah. You know, shifts in labour ward, in the gynae clinic, on antenatal clinic. It was wild. But now I'm a public health specialist. And it's because of breastfeeding that I've made that change. And so, yeah, I'm training to be a public health consultant, or at least I have been just for the last 2 months.
Tell me about breastfeeding as a transformative experience.
I didn't know how much it was going to matter. I think I did the same thing that a lot of people do when they're pregnant. And that it's like, yeah, I'd like to try breastfeeding. And I think I was sort of kidding myself by saying that I'll give it a go. And if it doesn't work out, it's fine. We'll use bottles. And honestly, a number of times I've heard that, especially now being on the other side of things. And I think, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, you know, and you nod along and you smile and you go, yeah, that's absolutely fine. You do what works for you. But then I've had the experience and I've seen it happen to other people. Most recently, my sister-in-law, who's got 3.5 weeks now, but other friends as well. And as soon as that baby is in your arms, it was like a need to be able to feed him myself. And everything that I'd said before he was born just completely went out of the window. But I still kept saying that stuff out loud. So I still kept saying, oh, it's fine if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, if it's hard. This idea of, oh, yeah, we'll introduce the bottle at some point so I could get a break. None of that ever happened. And I got to the 6-week mark and we were still going. And I was like, great, okay, we've hit the 6-week mark. I said, let's see where we go next. And then we got to the 6-month mark. And then I remember crying on the day that we decided to introduce solids, because all of a sudden he wasn't just breastfed anymore. And I was so proud that I'd gotten to that point, months, that milestone, and he'd only ever had my milk, despite challenges in the early days with 12% weight loss and jaundice and pop-ups and all of that. He only ever had my milk. And that was such a sense of pride. I'm also very, very aware that I only was able to do that because of the situation that I found myself in, with a husband who just kind of let me do what I wanted to do and then supported me along the way. And on the one occasion he did suggest formula, it was the middle of the night, he was screaming. He said, what about just giving him a bottle? I snapped at him and he never suggested it again. And I had a mum who had breastfed the 3 of us. And I've looked back at some of our WhatsApp messages from the early days when Peter was a newborn, and little things that she was saying, like, oh, you know, does he go on both breasts for each feed? just little things like that. So she's not an expert, but she's got that experience and she got it and understood. And then the other person who I think was instrumental in keeping my breastfeeding journey going was my community midwife, who on day 3 came out, did that weight, did that jaundice check. And I know so many people who've had that similar experience, and the midwife has gone, right, okay, well, you need to top up. And that's the end of it. She was called Jo. She sat with me and she goes, this is how you hand express. And she showed me how to hand express. And she gave me a little cup to collect it in. And she said, right, whatever you hand express, just give it back to him and hand express after each feed. And then you've got a pump. I did have a pump in the cupboard. It was a rubbish pump, but she said, you can try using that. And then from there, things kind of just kept going. And the reason he was losing weight in jaundice was because my milk was slow to come in. And I had quite a significant postpartum hemorrhage.
Right, yeah. That's normally what I hear, yeah.
It was calculated at the time as 1.85 litres.
Oh my God.
But I am 99% sure it's significantly more than that.
Still a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
You said that you were still saying the same things that you were saying beforehand, but that you didn't mean them.
But if it doesn't work out, yeah.
What do you think motivated you to carry on saying things that you didn't actually think anymore? What was that about?
I think it was almost like I was trying to reassure myself that if problems did arise and if it didn't go well for us, that I'd be okay with it and I wouldn't be, because if I was, it was almost as though if I said it enough, I'd start to believe it myself, even though I knew I didn't believe it.
I'm asking this because I think I did something similar and I'd forgotten. Just when you said it, I thought, yeah, that's something I did. And I think there was something about not wanting to appear to be too passionate about it.
Yeah, I think so.
Determined or something. Like it's not cool to be obsessed with it or
totally obsessed. I'm a breastfeeding peer supporter as well. And I'm in the process of setting up a charity for doctors who breastfeed. It's called MILC, MICL, MILC. Stands for Medics Lactation Community.
Nice little pun.
Yeah, Medics Lactation Community. And we are a group, I think there's about 30 of us across the UK and Ireland. We're all medics by background, all obsessed with breastfeeding. And the aim at the moment, we have a Facebook group of nearly 3,000 people, and it's just peer support, often tailored to the fact that we're doctors. And so we have a slightly different perspective on things. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves.
Have you seen the interview with Hannah in the Liverpool project, Cheshire and Merseyside? I'll send you a link. She wasn't like gynae like you, but her experience was really, really deep. And a lot of that was to do with her knowledge.
Yeah, and it's that expectation that we should know what we're doing and we know how the human body works.
Yeah. I think for her, yeah, that was part of it. And also, I think it's also to do with training, because what I heard from Hannah was that she had a certain amount of sort of belief in the system pre-giving birth. And I think that becoming a parent sort of was a bit of a crisis professionally as well as personally, because she suddenly realised there's this huge, vast, gaping blind spot. And not only was it really hard for her, but it was also sort of devastating on some level, that she hadn't received what she believed to be, good care. She was scathing, basically.
It's so true. Something I've done since Peter was born is I've gone back through my old med school notes to look at
what training you received.
Yeah, how much education did I actually get on breastfeeding? I
know how much you got. You got half an hour.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Because that's what it always is. The reason I know that is because she, who was in the first project in Brighton, she was on the committee that sets the questions for GPs. And she was the only woman on the committee. And the question came up, how long does the WHO suggest that women breastfeed? And she knew the answer, obviously, at least 2 years. Sitting around this table of men, they were just reviewing questions, answers. And the answer that was down was 1 year. And they were all like, yeah, that's fine. She was like, hold on. That's not fine. That is not the correct answer. When she told me that, it was sort of almost an aside. We were looking at an exhibition and talking about it. And I just thought, wow, it is so systemic, this blind spot. It is so deep. It's so structural. And it really is about I mean, a lot of it is about GPs. Oh, there's loads. There's GPs, there's
There's so much.
tons.
One of the things that MILC in the long, long term, our long term goal is that we will at some point become the faculty for lactation medicine. The way we view it is that the breast as an organ, as a system, is the only part of the body that has surgeons but not physicians.
Oh, interesting.
There's nobody that's dedicated to the function of the breast.
Yeah. This is kind of a little bit like endometrium, the sort of new discoveries about endometrium and
Yeah, and its function as an endocrine organ, it's women's health in general.
it's like a whole part of the body that has no sort
Yeah,
of, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about it in such a sort of physiological way.
yeah. The other thing that we kind of realise happens with breastfeeding as well, perhaps not uniquely, because I think there are other aspects of women's health and perhaps mental health as well where this happens. But we normalise pathology. So, new mum, she's got sore nipples because latch is suboptimal. And we go, oh, it's normal, it's meant to hurt. Not only do we normalize pathology, we pathologize what's normal. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're feeding a 3-year-old. Shouldn't they be on
Yeah.
by now? Shouldn't they be on cow's milk by now? And like you say, it is systemic, and that comes from people in every single branch of healthcare. You hear it from midwives who are supposedly our experts in this, but they only have a couple of days training. Yeah, I've only got half an hour as a doctor. They've only got a couple of days, and yet they're relied on by thousands of people every single day to support with infant feeding. GPs, like you say, but GPs, when do they first see a woman postpartum? 6 weeks. It's too late to be fixing those initial problems. But also, if a woman did go to a GP with those initial problems, is the GP going to know what to do? Probably not.
Mm.
And then, breast surgeons. I've got a colleague in MILC. She's about to become a breast consultant. So she is literally dealing with people with breastfeeding related problems, mastitis, abscesses, all of that on a daily basis. There is zero requirement for lactation education in the breast surgery curricula.
Wow.
I've got friends that are pediatric consultants, and they, again, the only education they get on infant feeding is one specific module in the neonatal pathway, and that's on specialist milk, i.e., formula, not human milk.
So this is why you've decided to go back and study because you want to change this.
Yeah.
Is that right? Am I skipping?
No,
I'm like skipping the 5-year process.
I don't really know where public health is going to take me. I love working for women. I love infant feeding.
Women don't need to breastfeed is where you started, which is actually comes up all the time. Women don't really want to breastfeed. That's also kind of at the beginning of this. And women create their own suffering. So this goes into the cultural bias that I talk about, which is that there's a narrow discussion, shallow engagement, poor visibility, low expectations, poor knowledge, and crucially, and this is one of the hardest ones to explain, an acceptance of women's pain. And this is what I talk about in terms of cultural change, but you're talking about it in terms of structural change, which is why it's so exciting for me to hear you talk about it, because I'm obviously trying to broaden discussions, deepen engagement, increase visibility. But in a way, unless you really listen to all the interviews, because obviously I've undertaken all the interviews, you don't really get the understanding that I've kind of got from the project. I mean, people might know a few of these aspects of what the problem is, but they don't really understand how it is such a crucially under-resourced, under-prioritized, absent from discussions, absent from agendas, absent from research. There's just not enough research. And then, this whole idea that we just accept women's pain. I mean, I think that's why I started the project, but it was a combination of I don't understand why this is so agonizing for me. And also, why does nobody care? It's unbelievable that nobody cares. I mean, the infant feeding teams, yes, they come around and they help. But if you've got breastfeed, nobody cares. And that to me is only possible because of these culturally received ideas that it's not for most people, it's just for a narrow segment of the population who don't really need to do it and don't really want to do it. And if they end up in pain or if it's or suffering, then they can just do formula. That's it. I mean, it's just this complacency and ambivalence around the subject that's I don't know, I've never stopped being annoyed about it, which is probably why I'm still doing it. Anyway, so I just wanted you to see that that is the basis for this project. Those ideas are the basis for this project, which is kind of a listening project, really, as much as anything else. Obviously, I'm attempting to make breastfeeding more visible as well in all its forms. So, someone like you feeding an older child, like that's a normal practice. But let me tell you, if I want to put that in the hospital, there will be, I imagine, well, we've got Ria in Bradford Infirmary, so she might win this argument.
I love Ria.
I found it really difficult to get those portraits into hospitals. I mean, that's what I talk about, the sort of like low expectations. They don't want to show women another woman breastfeeding a child because they think that that's going to just change the discussion around breastfeeding from breastfeeding a baby. And breastfeeding a baby is kind of where all the targets are. And so there's no knowledge or understanding that this is a tool that keeps on going for years and that is useful and beneficial for years.
One thing I'm really proud of is despite Peter's age, I continue to feed in public.
Yeah, that's brave. I mean, it's difficult to do as well because you're going to meet loads of cultural prejudice.
I have, but I carry on.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you this, right? Working on this project in Bradford, there's loads and loads of women in Bradford and all over the UK, mostly, admittedly, from maybe an ethnically diverse background, like they might be Somalian or Sudanese, or they might be Pakistani ethnicity, but they're all feeding their children like at least 2 years, maybe three. I meet women who've been breastfeeding for 15 years. They've got 4 kids. They've breastfed all of them full term. And the reason why we're doing this holding time chair in Bradford is to try to just to put this chair in a public space, which is a park, and then to encourage the next stage of it is to encourage discussion around the chair, to take it out of, I mean, art is great because it's where open debate can still take place. It's freedom of speech and all of that. And I do meet with these restrictions on what I can say when I only work in hospitals. So I do need that cultural sector. But what I'm finding is parks and, places that are genuinely like just occupied by the public. That's the real place to open up the discussion, I think. So that's why I'm trying this outdoor piece this time around. It's also just very lovely and it's a nice thing to do, but it's really about how can we take this discussion to the public where it's unmediated by culture and health, where it's truthful, because there's so many women. This is one example. So many women feeding older children in secret. There's so many women who are not feeding, who wanted to feed, and it's unacknowledged. It's not documented. It's not discussed. There's so many women who have incredibly, I mean, there's loads of men who have incredibly strong feelings about breastfeeding. So, yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I can't see myself doing a 5-year public health qualification to get it heard. It's a challenge to just keep going. I think culture is a place where we can actually bring about change, but not without the kind of change that you're talking about, not without the structural change.
Yeah, the two go hand in hand, don't they? Because
Definitely.
I think one of the things that what I'm really interested in, and I think this is probably what I'm going to write about in my dissertation and actually do a piece of original qualitative research on, is the role of doctors in breastfeeding, but more specifically, how their own personal breastfeeding experiences impact what they then feel and experience when they go back to giving clinical care.
Oh,
I know from my own experience that my practice as an obstetrician changed completely from one side of motherhood to the next. Before I became a mother to going back after maternity leave, and the priorities that I then had for my patients were completely different. Obviously, safety remained paramount, but it was so much more about, and I think I'd always thought that, I was supportive of individuals' choice and stuff like that. But again, I think I probably just gave that a bit of lip service. Whereas after coming back after having Peter and having issues like my own PPH and then some difficulties establishing breastfeeding and the rest of it, it then became really important to me to make sure that I was advocating for my patients and supporting their choices and helping them to make informed decisions. Because this is the other thing that really bugs me about infant feeding is the lack of evidence-based information. You know, as clinicians, as healthcare professionals, it is drilled into us through our training that we have to be keeping up to date with evidence and making sure that we read the nice guidelines and critically appraising the work that we do and the evidence that is presented to us. But that doesn't happen with infant feeding. All of infant feeding is, rather than evidence, rather than actual hard scientific evidence about how the body works, about the benefits of breastfeeding, about the challenges that arise in breastfeeding, it's about cultural expectation.
The thing is, breastfeeding is a cultural practice. That's one aspect of it, isn't it? And one criticism of the direction that breastfeeding support has gone in would be that it's become over medicalized. And you can see that that there is a trajectory, even if you just look at the funding for breastfeeding support, how it's moved more into a community-based, funded and supported by local councils. So you can sort of see that there is this move towards it being a public health issue, which is not dealt with necessarily by hospitals. On the other hand, one interesting example I've got of a very successful reallocation of funding leading to much better outcomes for breastfeeding mothers is North Manchester, where they took the 1.5 million that was being used for paediatric referrals for allergies, and they used it to recruit a kind of SWAT team of infant support feeding specialists, many of whom were actually lactation consultants. And they had, normally, I'm sure you know, the drop-off rate is extremely high. It's at least 50% by 6 weeks. Their drop-off rate was like 0.01% or something. It was almost nothing. And also the paediatric referrals were almost nothing. So it's just money going to the wrong place. And so it's a medical solution to the problem as opposed to a cultural one. I think there's loads of cultural influence on the advice that mothers are getting from medical health professionals. And that is so infuriating. And I hear it all the time. Loads of non-evidence-based anecdotal advice. Oh, they don't really need it, or you can't breastfeed while you're on those drugs, or you'll have to stop breastfeeding when you want to go back to work. Like ridiculous things that you think that's not even got. It's not even got like anecdotal evidence, let alone clinical evidence.
I think a lot of
This
that
is
as well,
so.
if it's coming from
Yeah,
somebody that has had their own breastfeeding experience, if that breastfeeding experience for the clinician was a negative one. So if you've got a GP that tried to breastfeed, didn't get the support that they needed for whatever reason, and then they are
yeah.
left with that grief and that trauma, they are then going to take that with them and carry that with them in all aspects of their life. So when they are then seeing that new mum who wants to breastfeed is having their own challenges, that's then projected onto their patient.
I mean, if you have staff that aren't even supported in their own breastfeeding journey, how do you expect them then to support patients? It's absolutely mad. It's like having mental health professionals who are all mentally unwell or something. It's like it's so contrary to all other forms of medicine that I can't understand how it's been allowed to roll in such a perverse direction for so long, and it is so difficult to stop that ball. It's just rolling and rolling. Yeah, you were saying the aspiration for your group, MILC. What is the long-term goal?
Something along the lines of turning into the faculty of lactation and breastfeeding medicine. With that, we would have a position to influence and influence is probably the word. So, you've got Royal College of GPs, Royal College of Obs and Gynae, Royal College of Child Health and Paediatrics, that basically get into those organisations, as well as things like, the GMC and the medical schools, and make infant feeding and breastfeeding a priority for them, making sure that we've got a voice in that on that stage. Hopefully we'll gain charity status. That's our first path. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
currently underway. And then, once we've got charity status, again, then there comes with that a little bit more recognition, I think. We can fundraise. We've got such an amazing team of people at the moment. There's 9 of us, myself included, who are the peer support leads. So we're slightly more experienced in the role of peer support. We've got a couple who are training to be breastfeeding counsellors, one who is an IBCLC, as well as her day job as a GP.
Gosh.
And then we've got other team members. Between the 30 or so of us, we've got people from all sorts of different medical specialties. So we've got surgeons, we've got paediatricians, we've got medics, GPs, psychiatrists.
Yeah, I was going to say to have the mental health aspect in there as well.
Yeah, we've got a couple of psychiatrists. Yeah.
You know, the cost to the taxpayer of postnatal depression, and it's so poorly understood how connected that can be to infant feeding issues. It's been really great talking to you, and thanks so much for all your time, Maddie. And keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Rebuilding the world in the shape of breastfeeding. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Holding Time podcast. We're grateful to everyone involved in this project, including our partners and funders, Bradford District Care Trust and Arts Council England and Better Place Bradford, and all the incredible mothers and families who made it all possible. For more information, visit holdingtime.org. The link is in the episode description. Please like, follow, or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And consider sharing this podcast to help raise awareness and support for breastfeeding.